be brilliant. Good morning, Bore da pawb, and welcome to our Wen Cafe, which is looking at young women and what they would like to see in the Senedd elections. So it's a really momentous election this May for us all, as it's the first time 16 and 17-year-olds are able to vote. This is the first time this has ever happened in the UK, and we're really excited to have three young women with us today, Sandy, Elena, and Beth, who are going to talk to us and answer some of my questions around what they want from these elections. What are the big issues that they think are facing them? And also perhaps thinking about recent events and how that's affected them, and how, for example, every year on International Women's Day, we celebrate and champion the incredible things women have done, but how much further have we got to go? So I'm really excited to start our questions off and to start the cafe. Before I do, I should introduce myself. I'm Catherine, the director of the Women's Equality Network Wales. I always forget that bit. Our vision is a Wales free from gender discrimination, and we want all women and all girls and all men and all boys to have equal power and equal opportunity to make their voices heard. So that's why we're all here today. And we're a membership organisation. So if you're not a member of Wen Wales, please do join us. Anyway, without further ado, we are going to start by asking our young people some questions. Then I'm delighted to have Sally Holland here, the Children's Commissioner for Wales. And she will do a little roundup at the end when we've heard from the young people. And then it's over to you all here on the call. Please do put your questions in the chat and introduce yourselves on the chat too, but do put any questions you've got for our panel into the chat, because I'm sure we will definitely come to that in half an hour. So I want to start by welcoming Sandy Ibrahim, who's a member of the Welsh Youth Parliament. And I'm going to ask you, Sandy, first of all, how's it been being part of the Welsh Youth Parliament?
I mean, being part of the first ever Welsh Youth Parliament is something that I should be proud of. Again, something that's always going to be in my heart and in my memory. Like, it's something that we've been so many things that no one can forget. Do you get me? Like, all these experiences, all these people that I've met, all these opportunities that I had were something that I did not thought I'll get into. Because when I did apply for the Welsh Youth Parliament, I was still new to the UK. I had no English. I had like a bit of English, so I was still improving my English. I came here in 2017 and applied to in 2017. So when I did get selected with the votes and stuff, I was quite surprised because like I've never thought I'll actually get into it. Something that it was surprising, but then by the end of it, it's something that I'm proud of it, something that have improved my skills way more, especially the communication skills. And something that it taught me is like, if you want something, keep fighting to get it. Like, never give up. I feel like because I'm new, I don't have many friends, I don't know anyone yet, I'll never get into it. But then if we want to, then we should keep fighting into it. And thankfully I did that and I did get into it. Something I'm proud of. All these young people, I've heard everyone's issue, like the young people that I've met through this journey. And it's something unforgettable.
Thank you, Sandy. That's great to hear. And really, your English is fantastic. I'm a Welsh learner. I wish my Welsh was as good as your English. So Beth, I've got a question for you next, Beth. I know you're really interested in environmental issues. So did you take part in the climate strikes that took place in the last couple of years? And what do you want to see from political parties on the issue of climate change?
Yeah, so I did take part in some of the strikes in and around my local area. And I love doing the strikes because it was just gathering everyone who had the same opinions and the same ideas and putting us all in one place and standing up for something we really believed in, which was just great. And as soon as we're allowed to do those again, we'll definitely be doing them. But yeah, I really don't feel like the government's doing enough. And it's such an important issue that I feel sometimes people forget about, because at the end of the day, all these other issues are so important, but they all relate to the environmental issues, because if we haven't got a planet to live on, then everything else comes afterwards. So the main thing really for me is I want the political parties to treat the climate emergency like a crisis, because if you look back at the global pandemic, they've treated this like a crisis, and look how far we've come. In a year, we've got 3 more vaccines. Like, that's never happened before, but it's because the government treated it as a crisis and something that needed to be solved, and that's what they did. But when it comes to climate change, this is something that has been an emergency and a crisis for years now, so many years, but it's kind of been pushed to the sidelines. So it needs to be something that is really treated as a crisis and something that needs to be acted upon now, so that the changes can really be made. Otherwise, it's too late, because it's getting to the point where it is going to be too late. And governments promise a lot of things, and especially when it comes to climate, they'll promise a lot of things, but the changes that are implemented never seem to be as much as what really needs to be done. And it needs to be in realistic timeframes that can actually make a difference, because making timeframes for 50 years, well, that's too late. Like, it needs the money and the funding and the resources need to be put in now, so that it will actually make a difference and we can save the planet while it can still be saved.
Well said. And are there any particular, so I just want to come back to you on that. So with that, so they need to make it priority, but is there one thing you think they need to do right now that could really make a difference, Beth?
Yeah, I think well, obviously education's a big part of it and people need to be more aware about it. But in terms of what they can actually do right now, as much as we can go out and protest, we're doing that to get the government's attention. We're doing it because they're the ones who can put the money into the sources. So even something as far as new houses and making them environmentally friendly, or more funding into, even when it comes down to little things like packaging, because you could go to a supermarket and you can get loose veg and you can get packaged veg. And the one that's wrapped in plastic always somehow seems to be cheaper. And when you give people this choice, obviously they're going to go for the cheaper option. So even putting things in place to make packaging cheaper, so the companies don't have to go for plastics, it's just making that so that people can make the right choices without like breaking the bank. So it's stuff like that. And even when building houses, making the insulation really good, because some of these houses can end up being self-heating, and solar panels, it needs the funding, because even though it might seem like a lot of money now, if you think of it in terms of the future, if you're putting solar panels on now, if they did this 20 years ago, then we would be in a much better position now. So it's time that they put the funding into more grants for renewable energy, as well as making electric cars cheaper as well, because that's a big thing. Because I know my family, we would love to have an electric car, but it's the price of it. And if you can't afford it, then it's like you're being punished for wanting to do the right thing. So it's just about, I think the main thing is funding, because lots of people can't afford to make the right choices they want to make.
Great, thank you, Beth. Thank you for being really clear on what's needed. So it's about funding, education, and I guess it's about subsidies to make those electric cars cheaper and to encourage more people to put solar panels on their roofs and so on. Okay, thank you. Well, changing topic now, I'm coming to Elena. And obviously all of you, I think, have been affected because of the pandemic in terms of your education. And I just want to hear from Elena how homeschooling went for you. You know, what do you feel you've really missed out? I'm sure you do. What could be done differently if we ever have to do this again, which hopefully we won't, and we have to see schools closed again for a long period of time? How could it be made better?
Yes, well, I was really lucky last term with my school. They kept the work going according to our daily timetables. We're using a mixture of set work and live lessons as well. And the live lessons, I thought they were really good and really important, because they gave a proper structure to the day. Before those live lessons started, it was really difficult to do the work within the school hours without going on and working into the evening. And it could be really difficult doing the set work by yourself in your bedroom for hours every day. In terms of how it could be improved next time, I think we would have really liked if we could come into school sometimes, like a day a week, for example, or maybe 1 week in 3. It would only have to be a year or a pair of years at a time, so that social distancing could be maintained. But I think that would have been really helpful for children in terms of making sure you kept in contact with your friends, and also so that teachers could check up on us and make sure that everyone could do the work. Because I think with the school closures, one aspect that hasn't been talked about enough is the social aspect, with pupils missing out socially. So I think implementing some sort of system where pupils could come into school sometimes would be really important next time. And also making sure that when we were learning at home, that everyone had internet access and access to a device. Because I know of some pupils who either couldn't work from home because they didn't have a device, or they were sharing devices between siblings, which meant they were missing out on lots of their lessons, and now they are at a disadvantage.
Thank you, Elena. I think you've raised some really good points there around digital exclusion, for example, and the people that didn't have the IT or didn't have internet access. And as a governor at my children's school, I think it's really interesting because we were asking how many laptops and how many kind of Wi-Fi dongles were given out. And it seems like, although the laptops were there, not all the parents who needed them actually knew that they could have gone and got a laptop. So there's a communication issue. And I'm really interested that you had live lessons and it went really well, because I know it was a bit of a postcode lottery across Wales. So some schools did provide the timetable as was, and then some schools didn't. And I think that's really interesting as well, about perhaps next time how we can get a more standardized approach so that some school children don't miss out. Anyway, let's carry on. Sandy, I want to come to you next and ask you, what's the biggest issue you've been dealing with at the Welsh Youth Parliament?
I mean, one of the hardest things I always have to face with young people is actually like getting them, telling them telling you everything that they feel inside of them. But even though this was kind of hard, it wasn't as much hard since lockdown have started and since Corona started. Because before lockdown, I had the opportunity to go down to East and do like a drop-in every Wednesday. So young people were surrounded up there, and I used to communicate with them, know more about them. But when lockdown started, it was kind of shocking. I don't know how to actually get in contact with them again. I haven't got their numbers, haven't got any of their social medias. So it was kind of like a shocking time. But because thankfully I did manage it good as well with the East side, because they do obviously have the contacts with young people that do got the drop-ins, I was able to again contact them and stuff. So I feel Corona have impacted not only the school and communication and us in mental health as people, everyone not communicating, stay in their bedrooms and stuff. It have impacted the Welsh Youth Parliament members as well, because they did find it hard to actually find again the young people that they used to communicate with. So I used to go to drop in to communicate with the young people. Other ones used to find them in their schools. Other ones used to find them somewhere else, wherever they could. So everyone have planned their way to contact young people. But since lockdown and since Corona, it has impacted all of us. But thankfully, we have managed everything successfully, and we did get everything good.
That's great, Sandy. Thank you. And just sticking with you for a moment, Sandy, what do you think, what's the most important thing to you in this election that you would like to see parties committing to?
I mean, the most important thing is equality. Nothing is more important than this, because thinking about it, if equality wasn't there, or say with the Welsh Parliament, if they say oh, women couldn't vote in the Welsh Parliament, that would have been shocking for all of us. But I feel equality is the most thing that I do want to see, and as well as improving mental health. So with the Welsh Youth Parliament, again, that was a thing that I was fighting for, mental health for young people, because I know since Corona, it has gotten worse, but even before Corona, young people still had to fight this. One of my closest friends had to fight that, leading her to not even coming to school. But she was referred to counseling in school, but then they called her like a few months after, like 4 months after, which obviously it does look like it's not good, like they don't help with anything. So yeah, I feel mental health and equality are the main things that I do really want to see change. I don't like to see like any young people that they do feel unfair, like no one likes them and stuff. Do you get me? Or like even most of them, you know, the young people that do come new to the UK, a new country, they do find it hard sometimes to communicate with other ones or like to meet young people. I was one of them. I was like quite shy. I couldn't communicate and stuff, but thankfully my school did help and they did like communicate with, like, put me into other groups to meet the people. But I feel if they do end up putting them into wrong groups or like say, so when I moved to in my new school, so the people that I was first surrounded with, they weren't really nice. They were like toxic, if I say it. So thankfully, I did manage it successfully, and like moved to another group, like people and stuff. So I feel just making sure like everyone's treated equally and like fairly. I don't want like to make anyone feel unfairly or like anyone like feel sad and stuff. So yeah.
Okay, thank you for that, Sandy. Yeah, that's absolutely on our agenda too. Equality and making sure that people are treated equally. And we know the pandemic has had really disproportionate effects on specifically on disabled women and on women of colour. And I'm sure we all need to really check those party political manifestos very carefully around their promises on equality. So I'm going to come back to Beth now. Beth, another topic you're really interested in is around period poverty. And I'd like to hear your reflections on that. And is it getting better or worse? And again, what would you like to see political parties doing on that?
Yeah, so I think it's often a problem that's overlooked because lots of us are very lucky in that we don't have to think about this problem. But imagine not being able to protect yourself against something that every woman has to go through. Like, I feel like everyone who has a period can get very self-conscious when they're on their period. But imagine having to stop yourself from doing something because you haven't got the protection and you can't leave the house and you can't afford that protection. And I think it takes away your dignity if you can't have that as a woman. So I think that's a big issue that governments have overlooked for a long time. But I think it's definitely getting better because Scotland last year, I think it was November last year, passed a bill to end period poverty by giving free sanitary products to anyone who needed them. So I think that was definitely a step in the right direction. And I know that last year Wales did Welsh government did fund 3.3 million into period poverty. And I'm not saying that's bad at all, that's amazing, but I think there's still more that can be done. And I think there's also alternatives that can be looked into because there's a lot of new products coming out, such as period underwear that lots of people haven't even heard of. But that's a good way that people could save money but also feel protected. So I think if government could invest in things like that as well, and by giving them to people, it would not only give people back their dignity, but help them save money too. And I think it would save money for the government in the long run too. And I feel like it's a human right in a way, because as a woman, it's not your fault you have a period. Like the fact that we have to pay for it, something doesn't sit right with me about that. So I just think governments need to put more focus into it, and we're definitely taking steps in the right direction, but I still think there's a lot more that needs to be done to make women feel comfortable and safe within their communities and throughout their daily lives.
Absolutely, Beth. Yeah, well said. And I just popped in the chat. I know we've got Chizomo here on the call, and she did some work campaigning on period poverty when she was National Union of Students women's officer, I think. So it'd be great if, and please do, this is just a reminder to you all to pop questions in the chat and ask questions for our panel, because we're going to be coming to you and opening the floor to questions very shortly. But In the meantime, I've got a question for Elena, which is around, another kind of question around education, which is, have you learnt about gender equality in school? Do you feel your school gives you any information on that, or raises awareness around sexism, harassment, and what to do if you have a problem? I'd really love to hear what you think about that, Elena. Thank you.
Yes, well, I'm really lucky at our school. We have a women's rights group, which I'm a member of, and we've discussed lots of problems concerning gender equality, like period poverty and also women's suffrage. And I think this is really important because women's rights aren't secure by any means, and it could be easily removed, like incrementally, if we don't stand for them. So that's why it's important to be taught about them at school. We've seen that with the pandemic, where people are saying that it might set women's rights back 50 years. And just yesterday in our English lesson, we were having a discussion about gender inequalities in sport. And it was, I think lots of the boys in my class especially were really shocked by how much gender stereotypes had stopped girls from participating in certain activities. And I think it's really important to teach pupils, because I know our school's sadly in the minority in having a women's rights group. And I think there should be more done in terms of the curriculum in lessons to make sure that everyone's educated about it from a young age, so that they're able to stand up for women's rights when it's necessary.
Brilliant. Elena for First Minister. Well, any of you for First Minister, to be honest. If any of you were to stand an election, you're all just making such great points, such strong points, the points that we at When Wales often make. And it's brilliant to hear you all talk about this. But you're not here to hear from me. So I'm going to pass over to the wonderful Sally Holland. Sally has been the Children's Commissioner for Wales since 2015. And before that, she was a registered social worker. She was also a professor at the School of Social Sciences at Cardiff Uni, where she specialised certainly and did some work around children's rights and children's social care. She's originally from Scotland, but she's lived in Wales since 1992 and is a Welsh speaker, because I've heard her speak Welsh very well. And I just want to pass over to you, Sally, to just reflect back on what we've heard from our three panellists. Any points that you'd like to raise from what they've heard, from what you've heard?
Diolch, Catherine, a diolch am y cyfle I siarad heddi. Really pleased to have the chance to speak today. I want to not speak for too long. There's so much I could say about all of that, but I know it's really, there's lots of questions starting and comments starting to come in. So I want to give the young people more chance to respond to those. But I just want to talk a little bit about the pandemic effect and what we might need to do next. And just overall want to say that I've always been baffled as Children's Commissioner when, whenever there's been yet another discussion about 16 and 17-year-olds having the vote, and the really condescending comments that come flooding in on social media, etc., about they'll just vote for whatever, something condescending, and then you hear people like these three girls, and there are thousands more like them across Wales, and just feel, thank goodness, that they will be part of the population choosing our next government, because we need people with their knowledge and passion to be voting. Just want to note that, a lot of people have been concerned about whether young people will know enough about voting when they come to vote. And I just want to advertise our Project Vote programme we're running at the moment. And Rhiannon from my team is on the call, so I hope she'll put the link into it in the chat. But we're running a parallel election for 11 to 15-year-olds. So I think the three young women here today will actually have a real vote, but we're running a parallel election as well, so that they will be 11 to 15-year-olds will be voting for real candidates. Unfortunately, it won't have an impact on the final result, but we're doing a lot of education about democracy and voting through that, and we will be publishing the results as on the night of the election to say this is what if only children had the vote, this is what the result would have been. And this week we did a session on people who died fighting for the vote with Laura McAllister, of course, you know, suffragettes featured heavily, as well as the fight for 16, 17-year-olds to have the vote, although of course luckily nobody died in that one. Yeah, I think we're moving forward on this, and just to be able to bring some of that passion in. And I followed the Youth Parliament progress really closely, and you know, Sandy's a wonderful, you know, representation of that Parliament, you know. And I remember, Sandy, when you were first there working with an Arabic interpreter, and it's just so wonderful to hear you being so articulate, expressing yourself without the interpreter now. It's brilliant. It's just mind-boggling, really, to see that. But you know, the Youth Parliament was more diverse and more representative of Wales than the Welsh Senedd is, and probably will be after the election, and than any other elected body in UK. And you know, that we really need to take steps, because the power of those different voices in the Youth Parliament, we just don't get that dynamic in adult elected chambers very often. So, you know, how can we take some of that forward? On the pandemic, you know, mental health obviously has been a real concern, and Elena talked about the social aspects, and in the thousands of young people, children, young people we've heard from in the pandemic, in our big surveys, you know, the lack of being able to mix with friends was by far the biggest worry. And 17-year-olds were 40% said that they felt lonely most of the time in January. So it's had a really big impact. But also we need to be careful not to talk about it just as a terrible, devastating thing for children, young people, because you know, that's a horrible thing to hear, actually, as a young person. And I think we also need to recognise all the things that young people have achieved during this period. So the way they've learned independently in a way that they wouldn't have had to do until they went to university, if they were to go to university, the way they've cared for others and their families and communities, all the new skills they've learned, and to have the reassurance, really, that we collectively as adults won't let this spoil their future. We'll make sure that employers and universities recognise those skills and recognise also what they missed in terms of formal schooling. So that's really what I'm fighting for in the pandemic. But we do need to move forward our mental health services, and that particularly affects girls. Girls are more likely to report mental health issues and problems with the mental health than boys are in adolescence. And they're also much more concerned about schoolwork, and get more anxious about schoolwork, even though they tend to do better in school than boys. And so we also, again, need to give girls that real reassurance that actually we're not going to try and make you catch up all of a sudden with everything you've missed. We're going to value what you've done, and we're going to let you learn in your own time, and we're going to support your well-being over the next few months to do that. So, you know, there's lots to be done on that, but the fact we've published now, after a lot of pushing, statutory guidance last week on a whole school approach to mental health in Wales, where children will learn about their mental health and they'll be supported their mental health at school level, I think is a really good start. And I'm going to be pushing the next government to make sure that's properly implemented and funded.
Great, thank you, Sally. I hope I haven't interrupted. It seemed like you came to an end there. So I've got some great questions here in the chat. So question from Jennifer Ramsey, asking panelists about the Reclaim the Streets campaign and women's safety generally, and what your experience is and what you want to see from political parties in Wales. Who'd like to go first on that one? Do unmute. Okay, Beth.
Yeah, I think I with the whole Reclaim the Streets, I found it quite scary, because obviously with the Sarah Everand, she was a 33-year-old woman, and I've always thought of it as more of a young woman's issue. And once you get to a certain age, it's kind of like you're safe because you're older, you're an adult, and it's okay. But it just highlights that really isn't the case. And like, I'll be going to uni next year in a city, and for me, I find that absolutely terrifying, because like, knowing that I won't be able to walk home from a night out back to my accommodation on my own is it's just so scary, and I just think it's absolutely awful. But I think it needs one thing that's missing is educating boys from a young age, because there's little things that people don't think of. And I'm quite lucky myself that I haven't experienced any harassment, but I know lots of my friends who have. And it's even just little things like catcalling. And men don't think of that as an issue, but it really is, because it just makes women feel vulnerable and you feel at risk. And I feel like if the ones who are catcalling now were educated from a young age that that isn't a compliment and it's not respectful, then this next generation will grow up knowing that that's not the thing to do, and women will grow up to be safer. Because even when it comes to things like jokes, I heard a boy in younger years yesterday joking about the 97%. And I just think, how can you think of that as a joke? And it's because there isn't the education there. They don't realize the severity of that situation, and they don't realize how much of an impact they might actually have in the future as men. And I think there is a lack of education for younger girls as well, because I don't think they quite understand. And I'm not saying that I want them, they shouldn't have to know about these issues when they're younger, because it's horrible. You don't want to know about it, but it needs to be implemented from a young age so that people grow up to be respectful and to know what's right and wrong when it comes to women and women's rights and women's safety.
Oh, well said, Beth. Absolutely. I can see lots of nods and people agreeing with you there. It's so important that, and definitely I think the big message for me is as well is we shouldn't have to change our behavior. You know, you shouldn't have to stop walking home from uni on your own at night. But I totally understand why you probably won't do it, but it's not your behavior that needs to change. It's men and boys' behavior. And one of the things we did actually this International Women's Day was produce a toolkit to try and get people thinking in schools about and teaching in schools around misogyny, sexism, and what is and isn't acceptable. So yeah, I thoroughly agree, we need more education on this issue. Sandy, would you like to address that question?
Yeah, sure. So with me, I do always use the buses and stuff. And I do always used to feel safe, to be honest. But then after like all these campaigns I've started, like all these stories that I've heard, it's still kind of like scary. Do you get me? Like I do always use the bus. I do sometimes walk through the night, like back home, especially like when I have meetings in the night. But that was before Corona. Now it's all gone through Corona. It's everything online. Before I used to walk like without thinking anything, but then now with all these campaigns, and I do actually like see what's wrong in the 97%, which is a really big number, and we should be proud of. No one should be proud of, and I feel every single one should be actually like trying to stop this. Some men do fight against this, and they say not all men. We know it's not all men. We actually know it's not all men. It's like saying all women have killed someone, but like we know it's not all women. It's like someone have does this, one person. But then still, I feel parents are like saying not all men and like sharing this hashtag and like publishing it. Should actually like try to listen to women's story and like what's their experience have been to actually try to improve this world and like try to improve this country in general. Parents are like actually like keep doing the same thing and keep going through the same issues and like this keep on growing. So yeah, I don't know, like it's something that we're actually like ashamed of, but then it's obviously something that we should keep our eyes on and we should tackle. We shouldn't just leave it there and say, oh yeah, men shouldn't do this and then move on. We should actually try to do something. And yeah.
Great. So I agree. So yeah, we've got to do something, and that should probably be around education. I've got another, Elena, I'm going to bring the next question to you, which is linked, and it's from Jenny McConnell, who says, all the speakers have been amazing. I'd agree entirely. What is your experience with consent education? If you can answer that one, Elena. I know she knows things have moved on since she was at school in the 2000s, but is there enough provision at the moment on consent in education?
Well, we have had consent lessons, particularly in the PSHE mornings usually. But other than that, we don't really get taught much at school about consent. And again, like Beth said, I think the important thing is from a young age, because even though it shouldn't be something that we have to worry about, by teaching children from being young, they'll come to understand what the right thing is to do. and hopefully that would reduce all the problems, because I know it does worry people. And one of my friends, her mum won't let her cycle to school anymore. She used to cycle to school, but the route to school, you have to come through some wooded areas, and she's not allowed to come on the bike anymore. And I think that's a real shame that we're having to change how we go about our day because of these issues. And I think, again, going back to the education from a young age, I think that is the main thing you can do to make sure that these problems start improving a bit.
Absolutely. I can see Sally wants to come in. So Sally, you respond, and then I'm going to ask Catherine Maybe's question.
Okay, just to say that we do have the opportunity to do this all much better, and with the new curriculum, which will be gradually coming in, we will have health and well-being as a central plank rather than just quite a marginalised lesson. It's really good to hear Elena saying that she's actually had consent lessons as part of that programme, but many tell us it's a really it's given very low priority in their school. So that will help. We've been pushing hard for a human rights education to be much stronger, children's rights and general human rights to be much stronger, of course, and equalities of all types. And Sandy mentioned, the importance of learning about equalities in school. They really will have to happen. When the curriculum bill went through a couple of weeks ago, there was a last-minute amendment which says that all school staff will have to learn about and know about children's human rights and some other rights as human rights too, and apply it to their work, which I am pleased to see. We also, of course, will have a universal provision of relationships and sexuality education. We've got a really good chance to get that right from an early age, where children will, even in nursery and foundation phase, can learn about consent. Did you ask, you've got to ask that other child before you grab them like this and drag them along and that kind of thing, so, we can start really early on. You don't get your way with another person by hitting them. We can learn these about good relationships and healthy relationships really early on and not all the way through. But there's an awful long way to go, I have to say. And, it's sad to hear the young women's feelings about that, although I'm not surprised. I'm unfortunate to hear that, because I hear it all the time from girls and women.
Yeah, and we I'm not surprised either, Sally, from what all three of them have been saying. And I think we wrote a letter recently to the First Minister, actually, in light of Wen Jingling and Sarah Everard's murders, talking about what needs to happen. And it was so interesting. I think, Beth, you said how the Welsh government and Westminster government have obviously treated the pandemic as an emergency. If they treated the climate change as an emergency, it would be dealt with. But also something that stuck with me, that the new Welsh Women's Aid chief exec said right at the beginning in one of our first Wen cafes, which we did on violence against women. She said, violence against women is a pandemic, and if we treated it as a pandemic as well, we would really be able to deal with it much more effectively. And we were calling in our letter for three things. First of all, education on misogyny and sexism and this whole area in schools, and bystander training, but not just for boys, because the thing is, if we just start now with boys, we've still got a whole generation of men who haven't had that training. So we need that training for men as well. And I feel like we also need an end to the victim blaming, so that if a girl comes forward and says, or someone shared indecent images, then she's blamed and the blame is put on her. We really need that stopped. And we really need an end to that kind of boys will be boys culture, which starts in primary school. So yeah, do have a look at the letter that my colleague Meg has put in the chat. Catherine maybe has a question here for our panelists. As an older woman, she sometimes feels she's become too used to everyday sexism, and none of us are calling it out enough, especially if we work in male-dominated spheres. What do our panelists think about this? I'm going to come to you, Sandy, on that question. So how can we be better at calling out sexism ourselves as older women, rather than just saying, oh, we're so used to it?
I mean, yeah, the thing that she said, like, we have just everyday sexism. and nothing is being said enough. One of the main things I feel that it could change is education, because I feel it's not educated enough in schools. Like if we do look, like they do educate maths much, English much, they give me like these things that they believe it's the main things, but then they do look into the real education that's gonna affect us in the future. So like say with maths, if we did equation now, we're gonna use it now for the exam and that's it. But then in the future, we're not gonna use it. But then if we actually been taught for sexism or like sexual like harassment and something, we will use in the future. It's gonna help us in the future compared to anything else. I just say math is not good. No, math's actually good, and like the good qualification to have. But at the same time, it's not gonna help us for a really long time. It's only for like a specific period, then it's gone. So I feel education and in schools is the main thing that it should be studied on, and as well as TV's advertisements and stuff. So I feel it should be like shown more. So like when we actually like watch TVs and stuff, we watch movies, we watch loads of things, but we never see like anything tackling this issue. It's always like some things like something else. So I feel education and actually like trying to like get into like the most used social media, most used things that people can see. So like for the older generation, we're gonna use the TVs. For the younger ones, we're gonna use social media. And then for the younger ones, we can use schools. So then we are sure that every single one have been taught and have been given the message that we want to. Parents are like sitting down and say, oh yeah, we need to tackle this issue, and then go to sleep. Don't do anything.
That's so true. So yeah, we need to target the message. We need the right message with the right kind of medium at the right time. Yeah, I totally get that. That's a really good point, Sandy. I'm going to come now to Beth, and in fact to all three of you. I want to ask, and please, by the way, if you're listening to the cafe and you have a question, just pop it in the chat and I'll read it out for you. But in the meantime, I'd like to start with Beth, and then I'll go to Elena and then to Sandy and ask you, what are the two main things you would like to see political parties committing to at this election?
For me, I feel like I didn't realise quite how much is being changed in the curriculum, as Sally said. So that's really good. But I feel like for me, that was one of the main things. And it's educating people more on social issues. And like Sandy was saying, learning maths is great. But when am I going to use Pythagoras' theorem when I'm older? Like learning these social issues as key concepts that we keep with us is really important. So educating people on social issues like sexism, racism, harassment, and all those social issues that are really important, I think, is something that political parties really need to focus on. And then also treating the climate emergency like a crisis that it is, because it is a real crisis. And just alongside that, Article 13 of the Children's Rights is our right to information. And I know political parties haven't been publicising their manifestos yet, but I find it quite difficult to find a kind of rundown on what political parties were really standing for. So I think just making sure that for my age group of 16, 17, 18-year-olds, that there's it's easy to find that information of like a summary so that we know what people are standing for.
Oh, really good points, Beth. That's really interesting about where to go for the information. Something we're hoping to do at WEN is do a kind of gender edit of all the different manifestos when they come out, but I don't, at the moment, the manifestos I don't think are even out yet, and then it'll be a case of us all searching for them and working through them. So I'm sure that's a really good point, that somewhere there needs to be a kind of collated thing about this is what it means for young children or for young people, and I guess Sally might be the person to work on that. So coming to Elena next, can you tell me what two things you'd like to see in the election?
Yes, well, I think, like Sandy was saying earlier, challenging inequalities would be one of the main things I'd say I'd like to see political parties committing to do. And that includes challenging health inequalities and gender inequalities and social inequalities, because many public health experts have been saying that the reason the UK has had so many deaths from COVID-19 is because of the stark health inequalities we have, and they're as a result of poverty, which affects women and children disproportionately. And I'd like to see political parties really committing to narrowing this gap. And as well, I think inequalities within education, because as I was saying about the devices earlier, and these inequalities have really been exacerbated by the pandemic, like we saw with the GCSE and A-level results last year. And I think, so catching up on the education and making sure everyone's helped equally, because otherwise the effects of the pandemic are going to be felt by my generation for the rest of our lives. And I think this will be especially relevant in this election, because it'll be the first time that people who are still in secondary education and colleges will be allowed to vote.
So true, Elena, absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more about the catching up, and also the fact that it's this crisis, it started off, we all called it a health crisis, it's an inequality crisis, isn't it? And so I think that's a really good point, that you think political parties must really address that in their manifesto. So coming to you now, Sandy, the same question. What 2 things would you like to see from political parties? And then I shall come on to Sally again.
As we've mentioned in most of the meeting, is equality, gender equality mainly, because I think that happens with women, it is a gender issue, because it's something that happens as a female, and it's not something that happens with a male. So equality is the main thing that I do want to see in the future, as well as mental health improvement, because we have lost so many people's young people's life due to mental health. And yeah, I feel this is one of the things that we all should tackle, and we should all look for into it. Like, we may know people like personally, but we never know what their issue is. So probably like people that we are really close to are suffering currently now from mental health issues, but they do not want to actually like say to you, or like want to keep it a secret. Like, we all see like everyone laugh, like smiles through the day, but we don't know what happens after we see them, after we left them. So yeah, equality and mental health are the main things that I'm looking forward as improvement.
Okay, thank you, Sandy. Yeah, you're right. It can be very hidden. Mental health problems can be very hidden. And so it is really important that political parties address that in their manifestos. Well, thank you all. You panelists have been absolutely amazing, I know, and I've had some messages to my personal WhatsApp saying, I really hope these 3 women get elected one day. I hope they stand. So, you know, well done, all 3 of you. Thank you so much for being so articulate and clear. I want to just give anyone else an opportunity to ask another question in the chat. But in the meantime, I'm going to pass over to Sally to just have the last words and to address some of those questions and issues that our panelists have raised today. Thank you, Sally.
Thank you so much. They've raised so many just absolutely vital issues. It's a bit daunting to know where to start, but just on a couple of those issues, I mean, I couldn't agree more with Beth about climate change, and you know, we really must treat it as an emergency. And young people have illustrated that so well. I mean, it's really, you know, actually the fact that we are getting governments and local authorities and others to declare it's an emergency is just down to young people. I have to say, you know, if young people hadn't been out in the streets and striking, I don't think it would have reached the political currency it's had. But what we don't see now is still very top down. So governments are then saying, well, this is what we think will work to tackle this emergency, and young people aren't getting seats around the table. So we've put in our manifesto that young people must have real seats around the table, because they're the ones who are raising these issues, and they are coming with solutions. I took a group of children, young people who were strikers, some were from primary school and some were from secondary schools, to meet the relevant minister in the Welsh government about 18 months ago, I think it was. And it was a really interesting meeting, because actually, particularly the younger children, I think they're really accepted and liked what the government was saying to them about what they were going to do. But actually some of the older ones were all girls, as it turns out. And I think girls have really led these climate change strikes, but boys have been engaged too. These were sixth form girls, and they were dissatisfied with what they'd heard and wrote such a wonderful manifesto back to say, you know, it was all very well having me in for a meeting, but actually you didn't address this and this point. And, you know, they were coming up with solutions. They weren't just saying you're all terrible. They were saying this is what needs to happen. So having young people as part of citizens' assemblies and bringing forward and involving the next youth parliament heavily in finding solutions will be so important. And then my other top issues are around equality, and that's about tackling, making sure that our schools are equal places for all of our children and young people, so that they all get an equal chance to fulfill their ambitions and their potential, which is one of their human rights, and that poverty is tackled as part of that. I'm squeezing in more than 2 issues, you can see here, Catherine, but tackling poverty is fundamental to all the other inequalities. And, you know, we really must do better on child poverty in particular. We just had the latest figures out again yesterday, and they've gone up, and they were pre-pandemic figures, and Wales has gone up again. So I don't know, I can't bear to think really what the pandemic figures will look like. And on mental health, you know, we're just starting to make some really solid changes in Wales on that, to have a really joined up, what we call a no wrong door approach to mental health. So whatever door people knock on, instead of being told you've hit the wrong door, the door is slammed in your face, that actually they will get a really proper, early and joined up response to that. And that is a girls and young women issue in particular, because they're more likely to seek help for mental health issues, but it's obviously for all young people. So they're the things that, you know, you know, if I could be king for the day, or queen for the day, I should say, in Wales, you know, I would be just thinking from day one, what can we do to just make some solid change on all of those things.
Thank you so much, Sally, Beth, Sandy and Elena. You've all raised some really fantastic points, and we really appreciate your time and the thought that you've put into all your answers. So what I'm hearing is, just in summary, I guess, is that it's about education, it's about tackling inequality and tackling poverty. Those are the really big issues that you as young women want to see. And kind of underneath all of those are how we teach consent, how we teach all school pupils, boys and girls, around sexism and calling it out, and how we can all be better citizens, I think, in calling it out. And so I think we'll leave it there. It's been a brilliant discussion. Please do join When Wales. If you're not a member of When Wales, we're fighting really hard to create a Wales free from gender discrimination. And a big part of that is around tackling poverty. And so we'd love it if you could join us. It's free to join When Wales, and the link is in the chat. So do join us if you haven't already. And I think we'll be seeing more of Elena, Sandy and Beth in the future. So thank you very much. And I know all the people on the call today will want to join me in thanking you very much for your incredible contribution to the discussions today. Thank you. Diolch yn fawr.